Right, good morning, everybody. I think we'll make a start. People are joining as we go, but I think we've got enough here now to get going. I say good morning. Welcome to this first inaugural sport and physical activity workforce network session. Glad you could join us. I hope that the next hour and a half will be interesting and stimulating for you, and you'll go away with some food for thought around workforce issues. So today's outline is roughly as you can see on the screen now. I'm going to talk for about 5 minutes around the context of the network, and then I'm delighted to say Spencer Moore will be exploring trends and issues for the workforce both in London and nationally with his presentation. Spencer's from Simspa, we'll hear more about him later. Then we've got a discussion group at 10 to 12 for about half an hour, and we'll sort of feedback some issues as well. So first of all, the network. Here at London Sport, we've had intentions to launch a physical activity workforce network for some time now, but like most of us, we've had to amend our plans due to COVID. And our intention was to launch this back in March, but of course it got caught up in COVID. We then was waiting to see how long this would carry on for, and it's clearly going to carry on for some time yet. So we've decided to go ahead with the online version of it to get it going effectively. I think that one of our original aims is to bring people together, and we're doing this virtually now, but I think in the future we still will have plans to bring you together, because we really think that the network and how people communicate and share ideas with each other on workforce issues is going to be really important going forward. So the background to the network is we want to support the workforce sector as best we can, and one way which we see we can do this in the future is to establish this network. And this network is essentially aimed at those who are responsible for a sport and physical activity workforce. So we have looked at where we can play a role, and we think our role is to support those who have to either coordinate, manage, recruit, oversee a workforce. And that workforce can be both a paid workforce, professional, or it can be a volunteer. Any of those are included within the brief. So what's in the network? Well, our intention at this stage is every 6 months we shall hold a new workforce network event, which will look to offer the following. And hopefully today will be a flavour of what we're trying to offer. So each session will hold insight and support for the workforce with related talks, presentations and workshops. We hope it will become a platform to share and discuss ideas and explore some of the sector issues we've got. We hope, well, not hope, there will be opportunities for discussion and networking on each event, as is going to happen today as well. And your views and your input is really crucial here. This is not about us presenting workforce issues to you, but you being really part of the dialogue. A chance to use the House of Sport for workforce events at free or reduced rate. We've made a commitment that anyone who signs up to the network and wishes to run workforce events in central London, then we think the House of Sport is a resource that you should be able to access and for you to use. And therefore, when we're able to get back in person and we're able to start moving around as normal, there will be an offer of you being able to use the House of Sport should you wish so for a workforce event. And equally, we want you to play a role in what we do in the future and how we go about setting agendas and topics. As we've already mentioned, who can get involved? Well, all those who have responsibility for sport and physical activity workforce, whether that be volunteers or paid staff. Equally, those who have a special interest in this area, in workforce issues, particularly in the London area, you're very much invited to take part. And equally, it could be those who are setting out on a career in this area and want to see what are some of the wider issues and some of the topics that they should be thinking about or becoming more involved in. I should say no one will be excluded. So if you've got friends, colleagues who want to take part and you're not sure, they're very welcome to come along. They're very welcome to join in the debate. The only thing I'd say here at this point is that the Workforce Network is not going to be around front-facing coaching and volunteering. It's not going to be around coaching courses or things like that. That's very important, but this is not our role for this network here. So I'm just showing this continuum here because this is what we've been using for quite a while here at London Sport in terms of who we consider the Workforce Network, who we consider in the sporting and physical activity network, workforce. It's a continuum, and I think we all sit on this at some point. And what we've done at London Sport is start to embrace people down the right-hand side. So we're trying to build a new workforce in some aspects of our work, and these can be people who are working with inactive people, but they're still what we're now considering part of our workforce continuum. And as we move along there, of course, at the far end, we've got those who are full-time paid professionals, maybe working with elite sports people, but in between that, there's a lot of other graduations. And this network is really looking at how we manage any aspect of that person on that continuum, and also how we move from one end to the other. And also how we can also play dual roles on that continuum as well. So I'm not going to say too much about this, but when we're going to meet, we was aiming for at least every 6 months. It'll be free of charge to attend these things, and certainly that will be the case when we're in person as well. In addition to this, what we're also hoping to do is create a virtual hub for the network. So this will be a place where you can find resources and support, but also maybe post up opportunities and training avenues that you may be wanting or you can maybe offer. And as I said here at the end, it's obviously online at the moment, but we do hope to get back into person when that allows. So that's a brief outline from me. Now I'm going to introduce Spencer Moore from SIMSPA, who's the strategy director for them. And Spencer's going to talk about a really interesting piece of insight that they have been working over the last 12 months, which looks at both issues nationally and within London as well. So I'm going to say good morning to Spencer and hand over to him.
Good morning, thank you, David. I'm just trying to, I'm not a Zoom expert, I'm more a team, so I'm just trying to work out how to share my screen with everybody. This will stop. Yes, okay, and there we go. So hopefully, if you could let me know if you can see that. My slide deck, has that come up, David?
It hasn't yet. Do you want me to share? I can...
Okay, there we go.
No, we'll go with there, yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I'm going to keep it on this format because I can see faces as well down the right hand side. So yeah, I'm Spencer Moore. I'm Director of Strategy for SIMSPA. We're your chartered institute. Okay, so we're the sector's chartered institute. We haven't been around long in our chartered form, but we can trace our history back about 125 years to the swimming pools and baths organisations and ISRM and ILAM and others. But yeah, so we lead on a UK basis around workforce, primarily around standards and policy and insight. So we work heavily with Sport England, so we're their lead workforce partner in terms of supporting them in their future workforce strategies. We also work with Sport Scotland and the other home nations, and we're starting to do some work with UK Sport. We're also a membership organisation, so we also look after fitness professionals, and people who are working in the leisure sector. So yeah, and so thank you for inviting me. Been looking forward to this one. It's been in my diary on and off for, as David said, for about 9 months. So it's good to get this kicked off. I'll be sort of starting my presentation sort of around some national issues. And a lot of what we'll be talking about sort of in the middle of the presentation is on that left-hand side of that continuum. So at the moment, we've been heavily focusing on the professional workforce. However, some of the strategic areas that I'll touch on probably go across that whole continuum. Sort of other than sort of the right-hand box, the non-sporting people. And a lot of the things sort of we're presenting now are also, from a strategic level, probably an indication of what's coming down the line from Sport England and their future strategy. That we're, as I said, we're working hand in glove with Sport England around their future strategy and giving them the insight and the ideas of where workforce and workforce strategies should be moving to over the next 10 years. So without further ado, it's interesting. So the first thing that we've been doing, and it has taken about 3 years, bizarrely, is actually to try and define our workforce. And it was interesting seeing David's slide. That's another way of actually defining our workforce. But we talk about the sports and physical activity workforce, and yeah, most people start thinking about, you know, your frontline staff, and forget that there's a much bigger workforce out there. It's also really important that we begin to define our workforce and be able to tell the story of our workforce. I think COVID showed us a lot around our impact on government. They don't understand us well enough. They don't understand the economics of our sector. They don't understand how many people they've employed. So being able to have that nomenclature and that agreed centralized landscape is key. So we've been working quite heavily on that, and we've started to adopt the government's labour market index. So a lot of the stats that you're going to see in the presentation actually come from government themselves. So we've managed to aggregate 8 sets of government data around our sector, and we've been working with a workforce economic partner called EMPSI to start to produce a snapshot. Hence why most of it is on professional, because a lot of the data that we can get our hands on at the moment is more around the professional workforce. And that's starting to really give us an interesting picture, which hopefully we can run through today, sort of at a national level, and again give you some specifics in terms of London. So what we've started to do also is make sure that not only can we define it, but that there's a new mental model in terms of how we perceive our workforce. If you looked at the bulk of the investment, the bulk of interventions that have been going on across our sector, most of it is in that frontline workforce circle. So we invest a lot of time and energy in fitness instructors, in coaches, and other areas like that, who directly impact on the participant, which is great. However, where we have been negligent is the other 3 circles that people on this call will probably sit in all of those 3 areas. And what we've noticed and the insight we've had is that whole, we need to look at this on a systems approach rather than just looking at one area of our workforce. It's very well looking at that frontline workforce and making them highly skilled, but if they're managed poorly and managers aren't well trained, that has a huge impact. We know that poor management is probably the second key driver to retention of our frontline workforce. We've got our support workforce, so there'll be many of you in the room. I used to work for a national governing body, and sort of I never really considered myself part of the workforce. My job was workforce lead at swimming, and I did things to our workforce, but never considered my own development and the role I play and the role I play in that whole system and infrastructure. And now I'm sort of more in that policymaker role. So if we don't consider the workforce in its whole, and we don't look at all of those areas, that they're all interrelated, and we don't invest and support each of those areas, then we're never really going to move the workforce on. And again, just sort of the slices down the side are just areas in terms of when we start to talk about the whole of the workforce. We've got a new and emerging workforce around health and well-being, which we've never had before, and that's interesting. So what we're just trying to say with this slide and the work that's gone on behind it, there's another 20 slides that sit behind this one slide. It talks about all the nomenclature and naming, which I'm more than happy to share at some point. It's just to say, let's be really clear on who our workforce is, and make sure that we focus on the whole workforce system rather than that frontline staff. And I think that's quite critical, and you'll start to see that coming through in future Sport England strategies. There's already a focus on leadership. I think that you'll start to see a greater adoption. So again, sort of let's really consider the whole system. In terms of numbers, these are the numbers that we've managed to collate from these 8 government sources, and as I said, it's predominantly on the paid workforce. So on David's slide, it's sort of the left-hand side boxes, and what this slide starts to show us is we have nationally across the UK 416,000 people who are working across sort of 5 different areas. You have sports clubs, fitness facilities on the right hand side, sports facilities, other sports activities, which always makes me laugh, which is a lot of that is in professional sport. And then you've got sports that happens actually in a education setting. So and that's the picture that government sees. That's how, if you ask them what does our workforce look like, that's how they see us. So they know we've got over 400,000. We're a relatively low paid sector, which compared to others, which is probably the #1 reason around retention. And then the enterprises and workforce, again, just starts to show us that currently there are just under 32,000 businesses registered under the government's definition of sport and physical activity. So we have a huge array of businesses. We know that 80% of those are SME, so we're very much sort of that small micro industry. And the last one, the workplaces, the 36,000. That's the number of facilities. So that what that tends to show us is that a lot of the organisations in our sector are single site or single geography employers. So it starts to give us some sort of idea of the size and the scale of the task that we're dealing with in terms of, especially on that professional workforce, in terms of if we want to influence and we want to influence employers in terms of getting them engaged with supporting their workforce. Excuse me. The key, I think, here is that traditionally, and this is a challenge for CIMSPA and other national organisations and Sport England, and again, probably the key role in this network and the active partnerships is being able to engage all of those individuals and all of those employers. CIMSPA, we think we do quite well. We've got nearly 400 employers in partnership who we engage with, but we're just scratching the surface of that. And then that you start to look at how many employers and individuals the network engages, and we're we're probably still only about 40% of that. So that there's 60% of, that sort of figure that just isn't being engaged with as a sector. And if you think about if we want to start changing behaviours and we want to start influencing and we want to start moving our sector forward, then there's a real engagement challenge in making sure that we're getting out to and being able to communicate with 32,000 employers and over 400,000 professional paid workforce. You add on top of that the 3 million volunteers, and then you can start to see the size and the scale of the challenge that we have. This again sort of breaks that slide down a little bit further, and actually starts to show the other area of our sector, or a couple of interesting things. So the light blue area is freelance. What we know since 2009, the freelance market's gone crazy in our sector. It's the biggest growth area in terms of jobs, and again starts to keeps on growing that SME micro economy that we have in our sector. So fitness instructors and coaches, you'll see later in London that there has been an exponential growth in that since 2011. The other interesting thing is that there's lots of sports people who are trained and qualified who actually work outside our sector. So that's the discrepancy between the 416,000 and the 584,000. So there's a lot of people who we train and qualify that don't actually work in our sector. And finally, just one again, more sort of a challenge or something to think about is that dark blue box, the 42%. So they make up of people who actually work in our sector but aren't sport and physical activity professionals. We might think, why do we bother? Why do we need to know about these? But these are members of the workforce that support and allow things to happen. They allow businesses to run. They're your marketing directors, your finance people, your sales people, people who without probably the biggest one is food and beverage. There's a lot of employers in our sector that rely on food and beverage for their income. So that there is, nearly 50% of the people who actually work in our sector aren't sport and physical activity. And do we have a responsibility to look at supporting them? Without them, physical buildings especially and organisations won't run. And if we want to grow activity, we need these organisations to stay alive. And say 50% of the workforce doesn't sit inside our natural wheelhouse, but they are an integral part of what we do and keeping our sector running. So I think that's an interesting challenge in terms of our focus, and that starts to sit outside the four wheels that was in the previous slide, or the one before that, in terms of our definition of our workforce. So again, sort of last slide, sort of nationally, sort of trying to paint the picture of where we are and what we know. As I said previously, turnover in our sector is massive. It's on average 30% of managerial positions leave the sector, and 40% technical. If you consider that pretty much every 3 years, we almost have a massive turnover, a 95% turnover of staff. That doesn't really give us the continuity. It doesn't potentially allow people to excel. There are people like me and many of us in this room that are lifers, people who are committed to this sector and done 15, 20 years or 5+ years. But the bulk of our workforce at the moment is very, very transient, and that's a challenge. Okay, there is about £50 million a year spent in the UK recruiting new staff. Okay, so that's money that is going out the system because we're not retaining our staff and we're not looking after them and supporting them. And if we can retain them and keep them in the sector, we can make them better. Again, the performance over time rationale that you can get somebody qualified and they probably know 25% of their job, and you get them in, and during their work they will get better through sort of social learning and just being on the job. But if we're losing them every year and every 2 years, most of these people are probably only 25, 30, 50% on their journey to being high performing. So retention is a key thing here. As we said, that's looking at recruiting 86,000 new people. So for me, it's a bit like trying to fill the bath up with a plug out. We're spending a lot of time and energy training and getting new people in, and maybe we should start to focus on getting people in and keeping them in and making them better. Of those vacancies, 20% are hard to fill, and we have significant skill shortages in that, which again we'll look at later, specifically for London. But broadly across the board in the UK, those hard to fill tend to be around sort of the technical and practical jobs. So sort of the bottom bullet point, coaches and fitness instructors and leisure assistants seem to be the top 3 jobs that are hard to fill, even though we train thousands and thousands and thousands of coaches and instructors every year. But again, the soft skills, teamwork, customer handling, problem solving, oral communication. And we've known that as a sector. We've known that for years. In the London Sport 2017 workforce vision, it was a key outcome. It was a key outcome that we need to really start to focus on those soft skills, and they're the ones that employers are crying out for. And we know they're the ones that will support participant experience and help us retain participants and grow participation. Yet we do nothing about it. Okay, the system is still churning out the same numbers of people with the same qualifications. And again, the staggering, I find it staggering, so some of you may not, but you put this against a context that annually in the UK, between individuals, between colleges, and between businesses and what the government also invests into our sector in terms of training, we spend in excess of £1.1 billion a year in education and training in our sector. I'll say that again, 1.1 billion. We think it's probably closer to 1.4, but we erred on the low side. So imagine if we as a sector across the UK had a training budget to support our workforce, professional and volunteer, that was 1.1 billion. I'm fairly sure that we could make some inroads with that sort of investment. So how do we influence apprenticeships, and how do we influence colleges and FE, and making sure that the courses and the money that's invested into FE is spent wisely? How do we influence, there's nearly £600 million a year spent by individuals who are going to university, who are coming out with degrees that of varying content, and not always valued by employers. They don't always know. Someone rocks up with a sport development and coaching degree, and to an employer, and 9 times out of 10 that they'll pick the employer, the candidates who's got their level 3 FA badge, because that's what they know and that's what they understand. So there's a real mismatch from in terms of the level of investment and the skills that we have, and as I said, also the sort of this staff turnover. And we probably wouldn't need to spend as much if we could retain people. We could invest some of that money into their CPD and make them better. So we would have a higher skilled workforce, as I said, rather than running the bath with the plug out. If we could put the plug in and use some of that 1.1 billion to invest into that workforce and make them more competent, then our role in terms of growing participation, I'm sure, would be a lot easier. So that's sort of a national overview. So we're going to go into a bit of a deep dive into London. Since 2015, London's seen an increase in its workforce, which is good. It actually bucks the UK economy in terms of growth, in terms of the number of jobs. Currently, I think the UK economy around job growth is about 1.8%. So as a sector, we are slightly higher than that. I think I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it's something about 3.8%. So as a sector, we've bucked the economy, and London's bucked that as well. The number of jobs in London, again, professional jobs in London, we estimate to be about 58,000, slightly lower than national average, but again, that's compared to other major regions. And sort of no surprise with the London weighting that the annual salary is a little bit higher. But what's been really interesting for us is looking and comparing regions by regions. And this starts to bring home the need to really start to drive local and regional skills economies. We've broken it down by home country and 10 English regions, and they all look differently. You can see from this slide, London's been a steady increase, sort of just over 3%. The Northwest has had a huge increase, and the reason being is that there was a massive investment into facilities and a lot of investment in private gym operators going into the Northwest. But then subsequently, sort of, another large conurbation with Birmingham in there, that they've had they're the only region that's had job losses. So they're down 10,000 by 28%. So we need to get away from this notion that there is a single skill strategy across the UK. What we need to start to strive towards is a framework of standards and policy that can then be implemented and driven at a local level to respond to those local needs. And I think that's really important, and it really starts to place the role of this sort of network and the active partnerships to start to have a greater role and emphasis in workforce and to own their workforce skills strategies. But I thought that was just quite an interesting slide in terms of, we've got the highest with Northwest and the lowest with West Midlands, and sort of London sits in the middle. We've managed to track back this growth, as you can see, hopefully from this slide, from 2003. Unfortunately, this graph was done pre-COVID, and what we'd managed to extrapolate is that London would have continued to grow, a very slight dip, but there was an expectation that London would grow. It's had a couple of peaks, 2011, which we assume was the Olympic Games, and then there was something happening in 2017. Everywhere across the country peaked slightly in 2017, but London had a really big spike in 2017, and we haven't worked out why yet. Maybe you guys can tell us why there was a peak in 2017, and then it sort of it went back to its trend. So pre-COVID, we were expecting London to continue to grow, sort of just under 3% in terms of the workforce. And as I said earlier, the big change in London is the number of frontline workforce. That's where the big growth is happening in terms of numbers. 11.2% in coaches and instructors and officials, and 10% in fitness. Again, you look at that compared to the nation, you can see where a lot of investment and a lot of jobs have been happening inside London. And then also not quite as big, and it does trend sort of the in the box. You'll see that because of that, there's been an increase of 7.2% in leisure and sports managers. So, you know, as you grow that frontline staff, more management positions have started to come. Again, it's just interesting that in other areas that the growth hasn't been as big in frontline, and that's just, again, just sort of brings to bear the need to have a look at this granular level in terms of what's happening region by region. This curve, this graph, sorry, is similar, as you said. That this sort of shows probably around that again, an overall growth of just under 3% across the board, but we still expect to see growth, the biggest growth in fitness instructors and sports coaches. The red numbers are slightly misleading because London had such a high peak in 2017. It's actually saying it's low, but if you take that 2017 blip out and you flatten the curve, then there will be that steady growth. However, what we have seen in terms of growth, these figures that I'm presenting to you come annually, so we don't get this as live data. So there's an annual data dump from government that, as I said, we can then extrapolate out and work through. But what we can map, or what our partner has been able to map for, is around job postings. So how many jobs have been going live, and that gives us a good indication of the heartbeat and the thriving. And you can start to see around job postings. We just pre-COVID, London was potentially going to go into another peak. Okay, so you know, February 2020 there was 2,300 unique jobs. So we would have been expecting a peak in 2020. Again, don't know why yet. However, COVID hit, and as you can see on the graph, everything plummeted. And apologies for the next graph. For some reason, it's mirrored the wrong way. So if you look on the x-axis, ideally it should have gone 2019 to 2020, but for some reason my Excel skills couldn't work out how to reverse it. But that shows what's happened in the last 12 months with COVID. So yeah, we started to have a little drop from October. We started to peak in London and thinking, okay, the London workforce economy is going to start taking off again. And then March it hit, and then it fell off a cliff, sort of down to August. And then the data that we've got, live data we've got, takes us up to October, which was pre the latest lockdown. But again, you can start to see the moment restrictions were lifted in the summer that we started to grow again. We're working quite closely, again, just trying to map out recovery. The mathematical models that we've seen and be able to work with says that our sector will actually bounce back quicker than any other sector in the UK economy. We're probably the hardest hit in terms of jobs, but we'll bounce back quicker. So that they're estimating that within 15 to 18 months of a vaccine being widely available, that our job economy should be back to where it was pre-COVID levels. But we'll wait and see. We'll continue to track that and see whether all the assumptions are true. As with everything with COVID, we're slightly flying a little bit blind. So that sort of kind of gives you a snapshot of where London is at the moment in terms of, you know, it was growing nicely. It was a steady growth. You had good growth in frontline staff, but yeah, you have been like the rest of the country. That graph you have in front of you isn't a lot different to any of the other regions. So we have dropped back. We've dropped back pre-2011 levels, to be honest, in terms of the jobs. So that's just something for us to think about. So this is another interesting sort of a couple of graphs. What we've been able to do is trawl job adverts coming out of London. So, and in it, we've been able to pull out keywords in terms of what employers actually want. So that's the dark blue bar on this graph. And what we've also managed to do is have a look across the piece, predominantly in LinkedIn. It's amazing what you can do with LinkedIn, and start to look at and map those and correlate those keywords on people's profile. It's not an exact science, but again, it starts to give us some really interesting stats. So in terms of hard skills, you can pretty much see, other than fitness testing and circuit training, the hard skills that are being put in job adverts by employers inside London doesn't match at all with the hard skills that people are identifying and saying that they've got. That's not to say they don't have them. They just might they're just not promoting them, or they might not have them. But it's a trend that we've seen, and again reflects against the national the national trend that we're seeing, and sort of reflects also the information on the earlier slide as well. So that was hard skills, and we start to go to soft skills again in a very, very similar picture. The discrepancy between what employers are looking for and what actually is out there in the workforce. Interestingly, the one in London, which does buck the trend slightly, is management and leadership. In most of the other regions, that's low, whereas London have a high propensity of leadership, sales, and management in their workforce, which is great. And that sort of, again, sort of leads to a challenge, I suppose, which I'll pose to the network and London Sport, in terms of, again, going back to my ranty soapbox earlier, that we have this huge investment, and more money's coming. The government are going to invest another £4 billion into skills in the future, that Boris and Rishi have continued to commit to further investment into adult skills and further education. So on top of that, again, our 1.1 billion, there's more money coming. So how do we change the stocks and flows? So how do we change the delivery of training and education into our sector? How do we make sure that in 5 years' time, that when I show you those two graphs again previously, that everything that we've got the skills that people require. As I said, it's been identified for as long as I've been around these soft skills. So how do we do that? It's very interesting again that government are talking about employer-led qualifications based on employer-led standards. Any of you that have engaged with SIMSPA in the past few years, we've undertaken a root and branch review of standards in our sector. So every single job role that we have out there, we've sat down with a group of employers and stakeholders and really unpicked what it actually is that you require to be a coach, what you require to be a personal trainer, a fitness instructor, a lifeguard, a swimming teacher, and loads of other jobs. We've also started to look at what it means to work with people with long-term medical conditions, what it means to work with the inactive, what does it mean to work in a school. So we've got over 40 sets of standards now that have been employer-led, and we can really start to pinpoint the key skills. And no surprise, everything in those professional standards, the soft skills just come out loud and clear. Everything is all about engagement, the ability to communicate, the ability to influence, the ability to have a basic conversation is the top thing that is coming out in every one of those standards. But I think the other key thing, again, just sort of with this network, is responding to local economic need. And that was one of the reasons why we started to really delve down into sort of looking at our regional skills variances. So if we can identify a clear plan and we know the skills in London that we require, we can map them to standards, and we can map that to education and training that meets those standards, and then it starts to give us a cat in hell's chance of changing the dynamics in the system and the stocks and flows, and making sure that the training that we're giving our existing and our future workforce is exactly what we're looking for in the future. So just a piece of work that we've started to do with Sport England is around these local sport and physical activity workforce strategies, economic strategies. So that we have a pilot running, or we're about to start a pilot. There's a place left, or 2 places left on that pilot. So we're working with at the moment 7 active partnerships. We plan to work with 8 in terms of working alongside them in creating sort of local skills plans. So again, looking further into this data, looking at the stocks and flows. What is it that London wants? And I'll say that the 2017 strategy that London Sport produced, in my eyes, is probably the strongest workforce strategy I've seen in a long time. It's the most contemporary. It's really really forward-looking, and it would be great to help sort of bring that to life, and that's what that's about. So where do we want to go? You've identified that in that strategy. Where are we now, and what are the stocks and flows? What do we need? What are the people? What are the skills that we need? And then yeah, potentially we can look to get that investment. LEPs, there may be someone from the local LEP here, I'm not sure, but they all have skill strategies. They all have money to invest into skills at that local level. So that's on top of the 4 billion and the 1.1 billion. So if there are real key areas that will drive that economy and drive that investment, then if we can get these skills plans and show what we need, then there's a chance to get further investment. And then let's deliver it through an infrastructure. You know, that let's start to engage with colleges. FE is a massively untapped source for us. Let's engage with high quality training providers and start to look at where we can take control of the supply of training, and make sure that that the training that actually we're spending our hard-earned money on is the training that meets our needs. So that's just sort of a little plug to say that this is a piece of work we're doing alongside Sport England and some active partnerships in terms of trying to address those skills gaps. And just sort of a final slide from me, sort of just what's coming down the line. Some of this will probably not be a surprise for those who have sort of been monitoring the webinars from Sport England. So 4 key quadrants of pieces of work that we are working hard with Sport England in terms of a future strategy. What we've just explained, that top left-hand corner, looks like, subject to successful pilots, that will become a key thing in terms of sort of that local skills planning and education and delivery. We think that's going to play a really key part in terms of supporting us in terms of the skills, but also giving us greater insight in terms of what's needed at that local level. Workforce governance is an emerging term. That's about how we start to make sure we've got the right regulation and policy and standards for deployment. I could go on for ages about that one, but that's a real challenge for us as a sector. This isn't just around child protection and all the other things that they're, you know, bullying and discrimination and insurance. I could tell you a thing or two about the state of insurance in our sector at the moment. So workforce governance and how we manage our workforce is going to be critical. Again, as I alluded to at the start of the presentation, engagement. our ability to communicate and engage and influence will be key here. We say we're only engaging with 30 to 40% of the people who are actually delivering in our sector. And diversity, again, that's front and center, everything Sport England are doing and part of our future strategy. And so sort of four key challenges there that could be form part of your debate later around, we've touched on one in detail about the skills planning around governance and the issues of managing your workforce and keeping them regulated and safe. How do we engage, especially in a microeconomy, and how do we increase diversity? So I think I've run over by 4 minutes, but apologies for that. But yeah, any questions?
Spencer, thanks very much there. Thanks very much for that. Lots of content there for us to digest. We've got time for a few questions before we go into breakout, and maybe sort of questions later. If you've got a question, maybe if you want to pop it into the chat, just say I've got a question, and then I'll pick up on it. I'll start with the first one, Spencer, for me. The turnover, you mentioned the turnover earlier on in your presentation. Do you know how it compares to other sectors? Are we much worse than others?
It's quite interesting. Yes, in a nutshell, and a lot of it is actually linked to the way we govern our workforce. So those that have a higher degree of regulation, and I'm not trying to mean red tape here, that you start to think of sectors, again, surveying, accounting, those types of things, that compared to them, yes. If you start to look at less regulated sectors like ourselves, it is comparable. How we manage and govern and support our workforce, it seems to be a real key critical area. The one sector I monitor the most, probably because it's a service industry like ourselves, and the types of people who come and work in it are very similar, is the health and social care sector, and they've gone through this sort of workforce transformation that we're alluding to now. So that they've really got their act in order. And again, I haven't got the stats, but again, one of our things would be to start to look at how their retention has improved since they've been going through this transformation, and starting to look at how they manage their workforce differently. So.
Great, thank you. Just checking here. I think what we'll do is, if we can, I think we'll go into the breakout rooms, so people can, if they've got any questions, that we can throw them up there. And Spencer will come back to them at the end if we can, and we can pick up on some of the issues there. So what's going to happen now, everybody, if you can see my screen here, there's sort of 4 discussion points here, which can someone give me the head? Can you see my screen? Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. So we're just going to go into 4 breakout rooms. I've arranged for 4 London Sport colleagues to just facilitate that. So you may have either Bevis, Emily, Alex, or Mel. So what's going to happen is you're going to be randomly put into one of the rooms. Please do think about what Spencer said. Spencer will be going in one of the rooms as well, and I'll be going in as well. But there are any other points you want to raise, please. It's a discussion this, so please do get involved. We'll do this for about 20 minutes, and then we'll come back to see what the feeling is around the room. So if I just bear with me while I I shall post the questions in the chat, by the way. And if you've got anything else in the chat, then we can do that as well. So let me just. Welcome back, everybody. You'll be glad to know that I've arranged for a free lunch at the end. So just 10 more minutes, then we can all have our free lunch. Great. So it'd be quite nice now just to go around the rooms, as to put it, and just to see what the sort of feeling was, any sort of comments, any sort of like queries we had, what the thoughts were. So can I start by going to what in theory would have been room 1? That was Emily.
Yeah, of course, David, thank you. So yeah, we had a really interesting conversation actually. It was kind of centred on that kind of transient workforce that was kind of, and the problems that kind of arose around how we could potentially keep the workforce, like kind of coming up with some solutions of what we could do. We'd kind of discussed potentially looking at the soft skills, so upskilling the workforce a little bit and giving them a bigger role within the workforce in the different boroughs to kind of keep them on that pathway. And then we also discussed potentially having some sort of a hub where we could have those, like a place for people to go and kind of get those qualifications. And then we also had a really interesting discussion near the end about also having some sort of sharing between boroughs so that you could have learning on things like how much the workforce were being paid, some sort of potential benchmarking as well, but also kind of sharing, say you had a coach that was delivering a session in one borough, if there were some sessions that they could also be doing in the neighbouring borough, it could give them a kind of fuller, richer role, and we could potentially retain them that way as well. So yeah, some really interesting discussions in our group.
Great, thanks, Emily. Certainly, I think some of that cross-border borough sharing in sort of like recovery period is going to be perhaps even more important than before. I should say, Spencer, by the way, come in at any point if you want to respond to any of these comments here. Shall we go to room 2? And that was Bevis, I think.
Right. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff that Emily spoke about, we talked about. We also talked about, obviously, the huge staff turnover, and obviously why that is, because obviously some of the, I guess, the bog standard coaching roles are very low paid, especially kind of in the kind of PT industry where people have to rent space and all the rest of it. And we also talked a lot about supporting management and the fact that they're probably at that level not invested in enough, which obviously has a knock-on effect further down the line you go. And we spoke also about staying in your local community, especially around kind of sessional coaches, because I understand what the challenge is. You know, if you're in a borough, say like Lewisham, for example, you're looking for someone who's local to deliver the session, whereas you wouldn't necessarily do that in any other kind of workspace. You'd try and find the best person available. We talked about collaboration and having a bigger network. So this, you know, creating a virtual hub where people can learn together, share best practices, different experiences, but it has to kind of be made accessible. And Holly made a really good point about giving people the training that they need as well. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Bevis. So the virtual hubs come out twice though, so that's interesting, and maybe that's something we'll pick up on collectively internally when we sort of we're going to pool all these ideas and suggestions and see where we are with it. By the way, everybody.
David, the hub bit is pretty hub front and centre in Sport England discussions at the moment. That's coming out really loud and clear a lot in terms of, you know, those social spaces and that learning environment. So I think that that is a regional and a national thing to consider. So
that's one to watch. Yeah, great. Yeah. Okay. Let's go to room 3, and that was Alex, if I'm right.
Thanks, David. I mean, again, the turnover sort of really hit home with everybody's staff turnover. We also touched upon diversity and perhaps the lack of people from sort of different ethnic backgrounds, women and girls not in more senior positions. So we were lucky enough to have Spencer in the group, and he's talking about the need to influence recruitment policy, including at sort of at college and universities when people are young and coming into the sector, but also developing very clear career pathways so people can really understand how we can progress or how they can progress in our sector. We're saying at the moment we just kind of fall into positions, you know, we just kind of develop through the sector over time, but there's no real clear pathway for doing that. It just kind of happens, and it's quite hard to explain to someone coming into the sector sort of what that progression would look like. In terms of sort of people's personal experiences, alumni group sort of very honestly said that time she feels quite alone and hasn't got that sort of support network around her. And Spencer said that's something he hears a huge amount in his role and in his experiences. So the network that we're developing here hopefully will be something that's sort of very valuable and sort of create that support, not just for the people who come onto this group, but for those people that you're sort of representing, that you work with as well. And finally, we're saying about how it's a really useful opportunity, sort of sometimes it's very sort of top down in terms of our approach, and Spencer sort of saying in terms of Simspur, perhaps that's sort of been possible in the past, and not just them, lots of other organisations. This is real opportunity sort of to hear sort of a more bottom up approach, again, by listening to the voices of you guys, but also the people that you're working with, sort of are working on the ground. So hopefully it can really change policy and thinking at a higher level.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Alex. I mean, I sort of nipped into your conversation about pathway and how we get from one place to the other. I mean, you're quite right in that group. I mean, I don't know how we end up where we are, but I couldn't tell you how we got there or where we're going to go next. But it's certainly, as a sector, it's a tricky one to describe, isn't it? And maybe that reveals some weaknesses in it, I think. Last but not least, let's go to room 4, and that's Mel.
Hi. Our group also talked quite a bit about retention, and it didn't really come as a surprise in terms of those figures. We also thought that the systems approach made sense, and especially the way that we are working in other areas in terms of kind of participation, that whole approach completely makes sense. We also talked about kind of the future role of the going forward, the role of the network, and kind of in no particular order, could we learn from the health and care sector, what have they done to improve retention? So what learning is there from that? Could we have speakers that come potentially to future, the next network, could that be themed around the learnings from that? How do we also raise the standards to allow people who want to stay in the sector to stay? So some of the solutions that the other groups have come up with could contribute to that as well. How do we replicate best practice? And actually that feeds into quite nicely into the hubs that some of the other groups have mentioned, and actually also looking at why are people leaving, and is there we kind of talked in our group about, was there a research piece missing on the turnover, and how does that then compare to the health and care sector in terms of their retention and turnover? And then lastly wondered, because I think again that figure around freelancers was quite high, and is it worth, or have we asked them kind of what is the reason for them doing the work, especially because there's been that steep increase in the number of freelancers, and is that then also contributing to the high turnover? Do we know that? And then there was a question that somebody asked that I don't know if Spencer you might be able to answer, which was in terms of the breakdown of the training to get that figure. So the figure that's there for training, do we know what the retention rate is after training? So I don't know how that figure was analysed. I can write the question in the group or feed it back if you're not able to answer now.
Yeah, I can't give you the exact figure off the top of my head, but yeah, there has been some work done in terms of how many people we go through our main education system. So 15,000 apprentices a year, 25,000 in 30,000 in FE, and 80,000 people in universities. And I think the recruitment rate is it's lower than 40%. So yeah, we spend 1.1 billion, yet less than 40% actually go into our sector. It's even lower in FE. The 30,000 people in colleges, very few of them actually move into our sector. So yeah, it's pretty, yeah, that's the frustration. We have a huge amount of money being spent, but not a lot of people end up in the sector, and a lot of it is career pathways and understanding how they get in the sector.
Thanks, Mel. Thanks, Spencer. Conscious of the time, everybody, as always with these things, you're up against it. I'm just going to finish up with a few concluding thoughts and comments for everybody. Can you see my slides, everybody, at the moment? Yeah. So, as I say, we're at the end now. This is the beginning of the network. Of course, it's the beginning of the conversation. We're never going to cover everything here. It's about just getting the ball rolling. There's going to be more. I would just like to say thank you to Spencer for speaking today. We are going to make his slides available. I think, Spencer, is that okay if we make them available via our website? And further details and information will be posted on our website. This is being recorded, so if any of your colleagues couldn't make it and do want to listen into the debate, then that will be shared as well. I'm just going to say, make sure you're registered for our network, because that's who the people I'm going to mail at directly. So if you are interested, stay on that register. I will send the link out to people who attended after this via email. Do tell your colleagues. Obviously, there's a lot of people working in London in this space, and they're not all here. So there's a lot of work to do for us. So do tell your colleagues, share the information about this and get them onto the next one. And equally, I will send you a link in the email to share your thoughts around today, so we can capture those. So if you haven't managed to talk about them in the workshop, or you don't think we've captured them, you will get another opportunity to do that when I send the link around. So that's the link there, which I'll send to you on an email after this, and everything will be posted up on our website in a few days' time. Do make sure you are registered for future events that we do around the network. So that remains only for me to say thanks for everybody attending, from my facilitators, for Spencer, and for you listening in as well. So I hope you'll join us for another network event soon. Thanks, everyone. Have a nice afternoon.
David.